You feel it before you understand it. The slight pressure in the room, the way the air acquires edges, the way silence begins to behave like an instrument. Your attention tightens into a single filament, and the world gathers around it, obedient, alert, as if the fabric of events were listening for your next breath. Something is calibrating, something is counting down, something is removing what cannot belong to who you are becoming. You do not move, you observe. In that stillness, the fear that usually hides in your peripheral awareness tries to negotiate. It bargains with memories, throws you scenes of past collapse, offers familiar catastrophes as proof of its loyalty. But your gaze is different now, clean, unblinking, unhooded by old stories. You are no longer peering through the fog of anticipated loss. You are seeing what is here, precisely here. And the quantum field, which never mistakes sincerity, begins to reconfigure itself around your undistorted attention. This is how it works. The universe is a ruthless mirror of coherence. When you observe with fear, the field entrains to your tremor and offers you timelines that fit the signal. When you observe without fear, the field entrains to your clarity and initiates immediate correction. Not gentle, not gradual, exact. The way a tuning fork erases noise. The way a surgeon's light finds the lesion in the tissue of a life. The way rivers abandon false beds and return to gravity's straightest truth. You can feel the realignment as micro shifts. Micro, muscle release around the eyes, a cooler temperature in the mind, a widening of the chest that isn't breath and isn't posture, something like a click behind your sternum, as if a gate has just fulfilled its design. Neurology catches up. The amygdala quiets. The prefrontal cortex brightens. Emotional charge converts into informational bandwidth. You are not suppressing anything. You are metabolizing signal. And in the raw field of this awareness, the contracts signed under fear begin to void themselves. Attachments that once felt sacred reveal their transactional architecture. Habits that pretended to protect you confess their tax. The timeline you have been paying for with your life announces its debt in full, and you do not argue because the mathematics are irrefutable. Observation without fear is the audit. The field is the ledger. Coherence is the only currency that holds. Listen closely now. The background hum shifts key. Synchronicities queuing at the threshold of your day request entry codes. The so-called obstacles acquire contour, not as enemies but as precise instruments aligned to shear away mismatched identities. People who cannot breathe at your new altitude experience, your silence as distance, your clarity as refusal, your boundaries as weather. Let them. Compassion without collapse is calibration. You remain, still, exact, and in remaining, you discover the ancient technology of attention, how it threads through space like a needle of light, how it stitches scattered selves into a garment that fits your future, how it refuses to waste a single photon on dramatizing what is already dissolving. The quantum field reads this refusal as instruction. It responds with ruthless, immediate realignment because you demanded nothing and signaled everything. You are not asking the universe to behave. You are behaving, and the universe recognizes its own discipline in you. Hold this frequency. Do not decorate it. Let what cannot sustain coherence fall without commentary. The loom is awake, and your thread has been claimed. You begin to notice the patterning under the patterning, the way a moment arrives carrying both the event and the instruction set that will tell you how to experience it. Before, you accepted the instruction set as law. Now you can read its code. A phone vibration is not a crisis. A raised eyebrow is not exile. An unexpected bill is not the future. They were never the problem. The problem was the reflex, an old, efficient loop that taught your nervous system to predict pain faster than it could perceive truth. You watch the loop without entering it. You see how the amygdala primes the body to fire first and ask later, how cortisol tries to purchase certainty with collateralized attention, how your breath shortens to fund a story you do not want. You do not shame the loop. You do not worship it either. You mark it like a cartographer tracing an obsolete border on a map, and your attention refuses to pay the old tolls. There is a physics to this refusal. The field is exquisitely literal. It measures signal quality, not rhetoric. When your awareness stops transmitting fear-laced prediction, the probability landscape collapses around a cleaner attractor. Coherence is not a mood, it is a structural alignment between observation and reality. The wave function of the moment stabilizes in the frequency of what you can hold with honesty. In simple terms, what you can face without flinching is permitted to arrive without distortion. You test this. A conversation you have avoided knocks at your door. Before, you would prepare armor, rehearsed lines, hedge phrases, exit routes disguised as empathy. Today, you bring breath. You let the other person's narrative move without adopting its gravity. You do not perform calm, you are unhooked. The field reads the lack of counterforce and stops generating dramatic friction. The scene loses its appetite for escalation. Truth appears, untheatrical and exact, like a ledger showing numbers instead of apologies. You test again. A decision with financial teeth waits on your desk. The old loop tries to convert uncertainty into catastrophe. You turn your chair toward the window and widen your sensory gate. The sound of traffic decreasing, the subtle warmth on your skin, the quiet architecture of the room. You let your nervous system register context larger than the spreadsheet. The prefrontal cortex brightens, pattern recognition returns, and choices organize themselves by integrity rather than panic. You choose the line that preserves coherence, even if it offends the habits that kept your previous identity employed. The field adjusts immediately. Emails route differently. Offers that were invisible become legible. The adjustment looks like coincidence to anyone who cannot hear key changes. You test a third time. Memory. It arrives like weather, sudden rain of an old humiliation, flash of a voice that called you too much, too soon, too tender. You do not repel it. You hold it in neutral sight until the chemical residue burns off and the image reveals itself as a younger version of you doing arithmetic with missing numbers. You retrieve the number. You return it to the equation. You feel the past re-render itself without the tax of shame. Trauma does not vanish. It unhooks from authorship. The field, relieved of its obligation to echo your unprocessed charge, stops casting actors for that old play. Now the ruthlessness begins to clarify itself as mercy. The immediate realignment you called in is not a punishment. It is an end to subsidy. Anything that required your fear in order to exist can no longer afford its own life. Contracts collapse. Obligations that were never wholly expire. Invitations that were covert extractions fail to reach your inbox. Some interpret your quiet as rejection. You let the misinterpretation stand. Accuracy has become more valuable than consensus. There is also the tenderness you did not expect. When you observe without fear, subtle data previously drowned out by alarm becomes available micro-expressions in a friend's face. The fatigue behind someone's performance, the exact sentence your inner child needed at 7 years old and never received. You give that sentence now, not as a performance, but as an update to the internal operating system. The body registers safety, not as a slogan, but as a measurable reduction in unnecessary muscular effort. Your gait changes, your handwriting steadies, sleep arrives without negotiations. You begin to speak differently, fewer adjectives, more nouns, fewer promises, more boundaries with dates and locations. Language stops trying to seduce reality and starts labeling it correctly. The field amplifies the labels that match. You say, "This is finished," and it is. You say, "This matters," and it grows in detail and support. You say nothing, and the silence keeps doing work you once begged for. What you are practicing is not control. It is stewardship. The difference is precise. Control tries to force outcomes to protect identity. Stewardship permits outcomes that protect coherence. One shrinks the world to fit the nervous system. The other educates the nervous system to fit the world you are actually here to serve. The field recognizes stewards. It routes resources to them because waste is mathematically expensive. Breathe once, slow, feel the ledger balance. Another line. Notice what has not collapsed. The friendships that can breathe in thinner air. The work that does not require your self-betrayal. The desire that remains after fantasy has been rinsed. These are not leftovers. These are load-bearing beams. You are not lighter because you escaped something. You are lighter because you are finally carrying only what is yours. You begin to understand that fearless observation is not a mood you chase but a structure you occupy, a temple with measurements precise enough that the quantum field recognizes your doorway and enters without confusion. The architecture is simple and merciless. Breath, gaze, language, body, signal, selection. Each element stabilizes the others. Like load-bearing columns aligned to a star, you finally remember how to point toward. Start with breath, not decorative, not mystical theater, but respiration, as data regulation vagus tone smoothing the error signals in your predictive brain, carbon dioxide calibrating the blood's pH, the interoceptive map returning fidelity to a nervous system that once outsourced its truth to external authority. You lengthen your exhale until the body hears its own permission. You stop flooding the future with adrenaline and call your awareness back from the edges. The field, which reads physiology as syntax, upgrades the grammar of your reality. Then gaze, not the anxious scan of a prey animal, not the tight beam of a hunter, but the informed aperture of a witness whose horizon has widened. You soften the ocular muscles and let peripheral vision come online. The amygdala hears safe enough and stands down. With the threat simulation defunded, the brain stops hallucinating enemies in ordinary shapes. What looked like chaos resolves into patterned movement. You can finally read the choreography instead of arguing with it. Now language. Words are not ornaments, they are coordinates. You pin into the lattice of possibility. When you say, "This is the last time," and your breath and gaze agree, the field receives a coherent triad and collapses probability into outcome. When you say, "I don't know yet," without smuggling panic under the syllables, uncertainty becomes a corridor rather than a cliff. You stop bribing the future with premature conclusions. You allow reality to reveal its next exact step. This is where ruthlessness becomes geometry. Fearless observation forces a topological shift in the self-world boundary. The old Markov blanket stitched from hypervigilance and apology loosens, and information can exchange without contaminating identity. You remain porous to what nourishes and impermeable to what extracts. Not because you are armored, but because your coherence no longer presents a purchase point for parasitic negotiations. The field routes different actors to your stage. Matching signals find each other with embarrassing speed. You notice how time behaves differently inside this architecture. Not faster, not slower, truer. Chronology stops pretending to be destiny and returns to its rightful role as a coordinate system. You can mark the moment a timeline bifurcates. A text you do not send, a meeting you decline, a truth you speak earlier than your reputation would prefer. The sensation is unmistakable, like a subtle click in the rails beneath a moving train. The carriage leaning into a new curvature, the body recognizes as relief. Fate was never fixed. It was an algorithm provisioning your fear. You stop paying its subscription. Practice exposes another principle. Energy management replaces drama management. Where you once outsourced ignition to crisis, you now produce propulsion from clarity. Attention ceases to be a leaking battery and becomes a disciplined current. You budget your yes. You inventory your no. You retire the emotional day trading that burned your reserves for the theater of being needed. Stewardship replaces saviorism, and the field stops testing you with fires you secretly hoped would make your light believable. There is also a physics of belonging that unveils itself when you hold this posture. Morphic resonance tunes your social field. Coherence seeks coherence. People whose nervous systems are addicted to unpredictability find you unentertaining, even threatening. They will often accuse you of being cold while your body finally runs warm. Others quiet, steady, mission-aligned drift into orbit without announcement. Collaboration replaces extraction. Conversation acquires silence around it like a lit pool holds darkness, and you realize that intimacy is not the sharing of wounds, but the coordination of futures. You begin to work with symbol, the way engineers work with load calculations. The broken loop becomes a reminder to refuse recursive suffering. The vortex eye becomes a mnemonic for stable attention at the center of moving conditions. The 11 gate becomes a humor the universe shares with you about timing, less superstition than syntax, less prophecy than precision. Synchronicities proliferate, not as prizes for good behavior, but as diagnostics confirming fit. This action belongs, this one does not, this path holds, this one demands self-betrayal as toll. Now you are ready for selection, not the frantic choosing of a starving mind, but the measured acceptance of what already matches your signal. You stop auditioning for rooms built on scarcity. You stop explaining your boundaries to mouths that are only asking because they intend to test the seam. You relocate your life to the altitude that supports it. The field complies because the equation balances. No miracles are required, only mathematics. Breathe once more. Feel the cathedral of your attention. Hold its shape. Hear the new acoustics, the way truth carries, the way false notes embarrass themselves and fade. You do not chase alignment now. You inhabit it, and by inhabiting, you broadcast the only kind of invitation the universe respects: uncompromised coherence. You begin the necessary austerity, not as punishment, as engineering. You realize your life is an electrical system, and everything either increases resistance or conducts destiny. Fearless observation turns this from metaphor into measurement. You can feel which conversations thicken your field with static, which foods demand too much regulation afterward, which environments ask your nervous system to babysit other people's unprocessed weather. You stop sentimental bookkeeping. You stop counting history as proof of fit. You start counting watts. This is timeline hygiene. It is unglamorous and exact. You audit inputs like a physicist watching noise in a signal chain. Light first. You give your morning to natural photons, letting circadian chemistry align your clock with the star that names your hours. The field reads the entrainment as competence, then sound. You retire panic, saturated media that trains your attention to mistake adrenaline for aliveness. You replace it with deliberate silence long enough to hear the micro-adjustments of your own system. Then speech. You make an agreement with your mouth. No prophecy of failure, no rehearsed catastrophes for social bonding, no self-deprecations disguised as humility. You remove jokes that function as soft assassinations. Humor remains. Self-betrayal does not. You engineer your room like a lab. The chair points where your future is coming from. The desk clears until only mission-bearing objects remain. You place a single symbol where your eye will land in moments of drift. A broken circle to remind your nervous system that loops are optional. A golden line to remind your posture that ascent is structural, not performative. Coherence, repeated, becomes culture. Your personal field becomes architecture. Others can feel without a brochure. The cut arrives. It always does once hygiene raises the signal-to-noise ratio. It rarely announces itself ceremonially. It appears as a very simple sentence that will cost you the reputation you built in a smaller world. I won't be continuing this. This is not mine. I won't carry that story anymore. You feel the click of rails beneath the train again, timeline bifurcation as body knowledge. The fear that used to dominate such thresholds now shows up as a faint administrative ping. You thank it for the memo and proceed. Neurobiology keeps pace. The limbic system stops hijacking executive function because you no longer outsource safety to consensus. The prefrontal cortex holds aim. Your interoceptive map sharpens, letting you distinguish between the ache of withdrawal from old stimulation and the ache of growth in unused musculature. You stop mislabeling healing as boredom. You stop calling peace nothing happening. The field, freed from the obligation to entertain you into presence, begins routing support too quiet for adrenaline addicts to notice emails with precise phrasing, a stranger's sentence that solves a design problem, a cancellation that opens the exact 2 hours needed for the work that moves the needle. You discover the arithmetic of boundaries, not walls, equations. If X extracts coherence, then Y is removed. No malice, no courtroom, just math. People calibrated to chaos will interpret this as cruelty. They will call your refusal a wound. You will be tempted to reframe yourself as kinder than your geometry allows. You won't, because you have seen what happens when you subsidize misalignment. Timelines littered with artifacts you never loved. A calendar full of obligations you secretly hope will cancel. A body trained to live in aftercare. Mercy without mathematics is codependency. Mathematics without mercy is machinery. You choose the middle path where compassion and precision share the steering wheel. Practice sharpens selection further. You run every invitation through 3 gates. Does it protect coherence? Does it advance mission? Can my nervous system carry it without borrowing from tomorrow? 2 yes answers are a no. 3 are a clean yes. This removes heroic narratives where you rescue a room from itself and call the crash evidence you gave everything. You give only what multiplies. Rituals stabilize the cut. The observer breath returns in microdoses throughout the day. 4 slow counts in, 6 counts out, once per hour, a metronome for stewardship. Gaze widens before emails open. Language is pruned before meetings begin. You end days with a ledger of energy rather than tasks. Where charge leaked, where charge compounded, which interactions left residue requiring transmutation, which left clean space. You treat sleep as a technology, dark room, cool air. The last words your nervous system hears are instructions, not gossip. Hold coherence, integrate upgrades, return with the cleanest thread. As hygiene becomes habit, synchronicity stops feeling like magic and starts feeling like infrastructure. The right people appear not because you manifested them with theater, but because you stopped emitting noise that kept them from finding you. The right work coheres not because the universe finally noticed you, but because you finally removed architecture that contradicted your stated aim. Realignment looks ruthless from the outside. From the inside, it feels like relief, so complete it could be mistaken for emptiness, until you notice how much power travels through emptiness when you don't stuff it with panic. There will be moments you are asked to prove your cut. They arrive as tests of softness, not aggression. The familiar invitation spoken in kinder tone, the old pattern wearing cleaner clothes. You will feel the nostalgia of your former personality reaching for the door handle. This is where you remember that mercy lives in accuracy. You say the sentence again, simple, unornamented, exact. The door closes without slam. The train leans into the truer turn, and your field, obedient to fearless sight, recalibrates another degree toward the future, already looking back at you with recognition. You turn toward relationships the way an engineer turns toward a circuit, not to romance the tangle, but to trace current and loss. Fearless observation asks you to measure entanglement without sentiment, who amplifies your coherence by simple proximity, who quietly taxes it through subtle phase shifts, who runs their life on borrowed voltage from your attention. This is not suspicion. This is physics. 2 systems in contact, exchange information until a stable pattern emerges, and if you enter contact while subsidizing your own fragmentation, the stable pattern will be lost disguised as love. You begin with signal. Watch how you speak after leaving someone's company. Do you require narrative repair explanations and rationalizations that convert discomfort into a noble story? Do you find yourself auditioning for your own approval because you mirrored a room you did not respect? The body records this before the mind invents a reason. A tightening at the base of the skull, a subtle tremor in the breath, a residue that sleep cannot wash. You treat these not as drama but as data. The field will not argue with numbers. Then you measure timing. Coherent bonds have a cadence that relieves the nervous system. There is space between messages and no panic inside the silence. Incoherent bonds counterfeit urgency. They confuse adrenaline with intimacy and call it chemistry. You can tell the difference the way you can tell weather from climate. Weather can be wild. Climate tells you whether a species can live here. When you stop praising volatility as proof of depth, you notice how exquisitely alive steadiness is. You test boundaries as instruments, not as barricades. A healthy connection adjusts to your geometry without complaint because it recognizes the gift of clarity. An extraction will test your edge and then call the seam unloving. In the past, you might have softened the seam to be perceived as kind. Now you let accuracy keep the shape. Your kindness moves upstream. You refuse to train anyone to extract what will cost them later. Sustainability becomes your definition of care. In the laboratory of conversation, you upgrade your questions. Instead of, "Do they like me?" you ask, "Does our contact produce more mission per unit of energy?" Instead of, "Am I safe?" you ask, "Does this field reward truth faster than performance?" Instead of, "Will this last?" you ask, "Can this evolve without consuming our integrity?" The answers appear in behavior, not promises. You watch for repair velocity, the time required for two nervous systems to return to coherence after misalignment. Fast repair signals maturity. Slowness coated in poetry signals addiction to rupture. Your inner entanglements require equal rigor. Old identities will call from inside the house. Roles you once played brilliantly, hero, caretaker, lightning rod, gifted ghost, will offer you stages with perfect lighting and familiar applause. You decline the role and keep the skills. Leadership without martyrdom. Generosity without leakage. Visibility without the tax of self-editing. You stop auditioning for myths that paid you in exhaustion. The field, accustomed to routing you tests for codependency, reroutes invitations toward collaboration that compounds. There is a spiritual arithmetic at work here. Every bond is an equation that either preserves or violates conservation of coherence. If your contact with someone requires you to abandon internal truth to maintain external peace, entropy will track the debt and collect it later with interest. Fearless observation refuses to run deficits in the name of love. You choose unions that multiply reality rather than anesthetize it. This is not austerity, it is stewardship of a shared future. You bring the audit to family lines without performing superiority theater. You do not litigate the past. You rewrite your participation in its script. Where the lineage worships suffering as proof of virtue, you practice competent joy. Where the lineage outsources agency to fate, you practice selection with receipts. Where the lineage confuses secrecy with safety, you practice unembarrassed truth-telling calibrated to capacity, not to shock. The field notices the discontinuity and updates the probabilities that your descendants will inherit. In intimacy, you retire the counterfeit currencies, jealousy as attention, confusion as depth, intermittent reinforcement as spark. You design new rituals, nervous system check-ins that speak in sensation, not accusation, pauses that honor the brain's need for context switching, agreements for how to land conflict without shrapnel. You treat trust as the speed at which truth can move through the space between you without triggering self-betrayal. If truth has to slow down to survive, you fix the channel or you leave the channel. The ruthlessness, some fear in you, is simply fidelity to signal integrity. On the subtle plane, you clean psychic debt. You recall fragments of attention left lodged in arguments, altars, and timelines where you tried to earn love by earning exhaustion. You name those scenes aloud and revoke their influence. You do not curse them, you archive them. The room feels larger when you stop renting space to ghosts. Dreams change accordingly. You wake with sentences you didn't have when you fell asleep. Morning decisions arrive pre-sorted by integrity. Entropy tests your upgrade with practicalities, calendar invitations that conflict with the work that actually moves your life. Emergencies that are simply someone else's refusal to plan, lucrative offers that require you to obscure what you know. The audit simplifies these. Does it preserve coherence? Does it advance mission? Can my nervous system carry it? If the arithmetic does not balance, the answer is no, delivered without drama, answered with silence if necessary. The field responds by forwarding what does balance. You watch how quickly replacement arrives when you refuse counterfeit. Finally, you face the oldest entanglement, the one with fear itself. You do not banish it. You revoke its executive privileges. Fear becomes a consultant whose only job is to bring you data about edges. It does not get a vote. It does not get the mic. It files its report. You thank it. You proceed. The mind, relieved of a tyrant, becomes creative again. The heart, relieved of a siege, becomes generous again. The body, relieved of constant alarms, becomes a clean instrument for a future that requires your full voltage. The field reads the clarity, and realignment accelerates ruthless to what extracts, merciful to what belongs, immediate because delay is simply incoherence measured in time. Now that your field is cleaner and your bonds are truer, the question emerges with mathematical inevitability. Vector, not vague purpose, not a slogan taped to a mirror, but aim expressed as repeatable work that the universe can fund because it reduces entropy in the shared field. Mission is not a feeling, it's a function transforming raw signal into value with a fidelity that makes support the least expensive option for reality. You begin by retiring mystical vagueness around contribution. You define your unit of value, the way physicists define a constant. One discrete transformation you can perform at will that leaves the world measurably more coherent. A design solved, a body regulated, a system clarified, a conflict landed without collateral. Name the unit, price the unit, protect the unit. The field routes resourcing to consistent functions, not to charismatic moods. Calendar becomes waveform. You stop treating time as a storage closet for other people's urgency and start treating it as a carrier for high-frequency output. Blocks of attention condense around your most signal-dense hours. The circadian peak is reserved for creation that advances the frontier, not for administrative triage that flatters the ego with busyness. Meetings shrink to the size of their necessity. If a call requires your presence because the system would fracture without it, you attend. If it requires your presence because someone refuses to write, you decline. The field reads the boundary and elevates collaborators who can write. You set a cadence, weekly sprints for emergence, monthly reviews for geometry, quarterly corridors for re-aiming the vector with new data. You measure by leading indicators, deep work hours protected, iterations shipped, repair velocity in the team, signal-to-noise ratio in customer feedback. Reputation becomes a lagging indicator, not a steering mechanism. You do not pivot for applause, you pivot for truth. The market is not a parent to please, it is a complex system to serve with accuracy. Money is de-romanticized and de-demonized. It is recognized as a carrier wave for agreements. Incoherent pricing trains the field to mistrust your math. Coherent pricing clarifies the channel. Energy out, energy in, no hidden subsidies. You stop undercharging to purchase permission. You stop over-promising to purchase attention. You write offers that do not need theater to survive. Those who say too much are telling you about their budgets, not your worth. Those who say too little are negotiating for extraction. You keep your numbers clean and let selection do its work. You design interfaces points where your voltage meets the world without frying it or dimming. Onboarding that regulates rather than dazzles. Documentation that teaches the nervous system what done feels like. Exit paths that preserve dignity and reusable signal. You remove friction where learning should flow and add friction where extraction would sneak in. Forms, not walls. Gates, not moats. Each interface becomes a lens that concentrates your mission into the exact intensity required for compound effect. Teams assemble with less romance and more physics. You hire for coherence under pressure, not only for brilliance under rehearsal. You test for repair velocity and ego elasticity. You privilege those who metabolize ambiguity without inventing drama to feel alive. Titles shrink, ownership increases. Meetings begin with breath to synchronize bandwidth and end with nouns and dates so reality can root itself accordingly. Praise is specific, so it reinforces the behavior that produced the outcome. Critique is surgical, so it does not bleed into identity. The field rewards leaders who waste neither signal nor people. Your tools and environment become extensions of your nervous system. Latency is treated like a toxin. You reduce click debt. You automate where repetition would de-soul your attention, and you refuse to automate where presence is the point. You document as you go, not for control but for continuity, so the mission outlives your mood. You treat version history as a sacred archive of learning, not a museum of past selves to defend. When an experiment fails, you do not perform grief as branding. You ship the post-mortem and redirect current to the next hypothesis. Speed without panic, pace without laziness, rhythm that a body can live in for decades. You address the psychology of output with equal precision. The urge to overwork is acknowledged as a relic of survival, not a proof of devotion. You stop borrowing tomorrow's clarity to win today's applause. You create end-of-day shutdown rituals that return your mind to baseline so sleep can consolidate upgrades instead of litigating unresolved loops. Morning begins at night. Victory is a circadian skill. The field honors bodies that honor physics. Creative practice becomes laboratory, not lottery. You separate idea generation from evaluation, so the critic doesn't strangle the infant. You run microbets, small, truthful ships that feed the system with data faster than perfection can starve it. Feedback arrives. You metabolize signal. You update. No drama. No collapsing into meaning every time the world says, "Not yet." You do not outsource identity to response. You outsource strategy to reality's reply. Finally, you formalize selection downstream of mission. Not, "What can I get?" but "What can I steward without leakage?" New partnerships are tested with small contracts designed to surface truth quickly. Can we tell each other the sharp thing by Wednesday? Can we disagree and keep the vector intact? Can we maintain output when applause dips? If the answers arrive as theater, you spare everyone the tuition of a longer lesson. If the answers arrive as behavior, the vector compounds. Observe the room now. Less furniture, more current, fewer words, truer nouns. Your work begins to exhibit that unmistakable signature of reality-aligned systems, effort that looks smaller than the outcome. Outsiders will call it luck. Insiders will call it discipline. You will call it coherence, doing what coherence does when fear stops directing the budget. Quietly, ruthlessly, immediately realigning everything to the aim you finally have the courage to hold. You have aligned vector and system. Now the instrument must match the score. The mind loves declarations, but the body is the ledger that must clear them. Fearless observation descends from philosophy into fascia, from rhetoric into ribcage, from vision into voltage. You stop treating embodiment as a wellness hobby and begin to treat it as the antenna array through which the field measures whether you can carry what you are asking to steward. Start with baseline. Most people do not have one. They live in a rolling average of micro-alarms and call it personality. You choose a measurable quiet. You identify what your regulated state feels like in unpoetic detail. Skin temperature, saliva volume, peripheral vision, the specific texture of thought when it is not negotiating with ghosts. You write these down. Baseline becomes a protocol, not a mood. If you cannot name regulation, you will spend years trying to manifest what your nervous system will instantly reject. You begin to court, load, not punishment, load. The exact amount of intensity required to grow capacity without tearing tissue. You design micro-stressors with reverence. Cold exposure, that is sensation, not theater. Lifting that builds cross bridges of confidence between brain and muscle. Deliberate heat that teaches your system to find breath inside overwhelm. You are teaching your body the difference between edge and emergency. The field watches for this literacy. It routes larger currents only to nervous systems that will not turn voltage into spectacle. Nutrition becomes signal hygiene. You retire foods that purchase short-term calm with long-term fog. You stop outsourcing mood to sugar and calling it intuition about timing. Hydration resumes its role as conductivity rather than penance. You notice the exact hour when caffeine stops being clarity and becomes counterfeit courage, and you refuse the second cup the way you refuse flattery that asks you to betray your aim. The body reads this as safety. The mind reads it as permission to sharpen. You tend to sleep as if it were sacred code deployment. Darkness is non-negotiable. Devices go to exile before you reach the bed because your circadian software is not a sandbox for everyone else's urgency. You close the day with a sentence that instructs the night crew. Consolidate learning, upgrade pattern recognition, archive obsolete fear. Morning reveals whether the directive landed. You stop arguing with the metrics when they tell you the truth about blue light and bravado. You study movement as prophecy. Gates tell you what your future will cost your joints if you do not learn economy. You correct, understride, and overreach the way you would correct a leaky metaphor quietly, daily, until elegance appears. Posture stops being a pose and becomes a path for breath to move unimpeded through the instrument. Jaw unclenches. Tongue finds the roof of the mouth. Pelvic floor learns to hold without hoarding. You are building a highway for voltage, not an altar to aesthetics. You apply the same rigor to sensation labeling. The untrained mind calls everything anxiety. You discriminate. Is it anticipation misnamed because novelty once arrived with harm? Is it glucose crash pretending to be fate? Is it inherited weather from a lineage that never learned repair? Each answer specifies a different intervention. You stop sending poetry to jobs biology can do, and biology to jobs only truth can do. The field increases throughput when systems route tasks to correct layers. There is a spiritual dignity in becoming metabolically honest. You refuse spiritualized bypass that calls exhaustion a test and dissociation observer. True witnessing includes the animal. You let your heart rate variability be a sermon. You allow the data to interrupt your myth of being the exception. You become the kind of steward who cancels a launch because the collective nervous system is saturated, not because you are afraid, but because you read signal and refuse to add noise. The universe loves leaders who can feel beyond their calendar. Pain becomes a teacher whose curriculum you now understand. Acute pain says, change behavior. Chronic pain says, change system. Phantom pain says, change story. You change accordingly. You stop bargaining with tissue by promising rest you will not keep. You earn trust with consistency. The instrument recovers faster, not because you deserve it, but because physics rewards accurate inputs. Miracles are simply timelines where maintenance was not glamorized out of the budget. You cultivate rituals that bind mind and body in real time. 3-breath arrivals at thresholds before doors, before calls, before creation, so your animal knows where your God intends to go. 10-minute resets at midday where eyes find distance so focus can regenerate. Evening walks that teach your vestibular system to reconcile forward motion with soft gaze practice for moving through uncertainty without faking control. Each ritual is a stitch. The garment holds. Identity begins to molt as the instrument stabilizes. You notice how many of your preferences were actually compensations for dysregulation. The music you used to require to drown your thoughts becomes optional. The arguments you once sought to feel alive become unappetizing. The rooms that once felt like destiny reveal themselves as stall tactics. You do not judge the previous you. You archive them with gratitude for keeping the line alive until you could take the baton with steady hands. Now the prophecy enters tissue. You stop talking like coherence and start walking like it. Stride smooth, voice grounded, micro choices that compound into a climate where truth can grow without constant firefighting. Outsiders call it discipline. Insiders feel it as ease. You experience it as inevitability. The body finally matching the clarity of the mind, the instrument tuned to the key of the aim, the field responding with resources that would have been lethal at your previous capacity. You carry more without leaking, you shine brighter without burning, you rest deeper without guilt. And so the antenna stands, quiet and tall, reading the wind of the future not as threat but as invitation. Voltage arrives, the instrument hums, reality listens. You have tuned the instrument. Now you refine the transmission. Signalcraft is the discipline of speaking with reality in the only language it cannot ignore, coherence encoded as behavior. The field does not negotiate with theatrics. It listens for pattern integrity, for signals that repeat without contradiction, for rituals that do not collapse under scrutiny. You begin to audit every output as if it were a carrier wave. What frequency am I broadcasting? What information does my presence embed? What redundancy protects the message when stress arrives? You start by distinguishing wish from instruction. A wish leaks, counter-signal tone undermining words, posture contradicting intention, calendar betraying declared priorities. An instruction harmonizes channels. Breath agrees, gaze agrees, language agrees, environment agrees. You align these streams until selection becomes less a decision than a checksum. The field verifies consistency and routes resources along the lowest resistance path. This is not mystical favoritism, it is systems behavior. Coherent nodes receive throughput because they waste less. You treat attention like spectrum, narrowband for creation, broadband for sensing, but never static for self-soothing. You schedule windows where your awareness deliberately widens to include long timelines, lineage patterns, market geometry, ecological weather. Then you narrow to a single pixel of work until the pixel emits heat. This oscillation builds anti-fragility. Most people drown in broadband and burn out in narrowband. You train the switch. The field hears the rhythm and entrusts you with signals others cannot carry without distorting. You formalize your lexicon. Certain words bend reality because they encode actions your nervous system will actually perform under pressure. Ship, close, end, repair, return. Other words are theatrical scaffolds that collapse at the first gust of truth. You prune them. You stop advertising intent and start documenting iteration. You write sentences with nouns, verbs, dates. You end meetings with beings and deadlines, not adjectives and hope. The field rewards specifically labeled containers. Vague ones accumulate entropy. Rituals become protocols. You retire superstition and keep structure. Morning, calibrate physiology. Set the aim. Write the 3 non-negotiables that move the mission 1 measurable unit. Midday, cycle the nervous system back to baseline. Close micro loops. Renegotiate the afternoon based on real data, not fantasy about future capacity. Evening, ledger the energy. Archive learnings. Issue night instructions. Close the sensory gate. These protocols operate like firmware. They keep coherence running when your mood would prefer drama. The field prefers firmware to charisma. You design beacons, repeatable public signals that tell the world where to find you without begging for attention. Weekly outputs that compound. Standing invitations that filter by responsibility. Office hours that return asymmetry to the commons. You show up with the same frequency and allow compounding to do what heroics can't. Eventually, the right people navigate to your light, not because you broadcast louder, but because you broadcast truer. The field routes seekers to sources. You also practice graceful silence, not withdrawal. Bandwidth conservation. You refuse to answer questions that were asked to harvest your energy rather than to locate truth. You let absence do instructive work. Silence clarifies boundaries faster than explanations ever could. When you re-enter, you bring signal, not apology. Synchronicity becomes a diagnostic tool rather than a religion. You measure density. More aligned coincidences per unit time when your output is honest. Fewer when leakage returns. The symbol set evolves from entertainment to interface. Vortex I for stable witness. Golden code for uncompromised commitments. Broken loop for exit from recursion. 11 gate for timing windows when small actions compound disproportionately. You are not chasing signs. You are checking the dashboard of a system you built. You practice clean asks. If you request support, you attach constraints and consequences. By Friday, scope limited to A and B, budget X, failure state is Y. Clean asks remove the theater of mind, reading and ethics of exhaustion. You stop recruiting people into rescues and start recruiting them into agreements. The field responds by elevating collaborators who metabolize clarity and repelling those who require confusion to feel powerful. Error handling becomes culture. You script how you and your team recover from drift. Acknowledge without spectacle, repair at the layer of cause, memorialize the lesson, restore cadence. You stop hiring arsonists to moonlight as firefighters. You reward boredom-proof consistency, not crisis choreography. The field assigns larger fires only to those who no longer need them to feel alive. You extend Signalcraft to money, love, art, money, invoices that land on rhythm, clear value exchange, zero guilt about profit that funds stewardship. Love, truth, moving fast between 2 regulated bodies. Repair measured in hours, not days. Desire treated as data, not deity. Art, experiments shipped before reverence calcifies into inhibition. Critique metabolized without identity collapse. Audience treated as co-researchers rather than judges you must enchant. Finally, you stage the hardest transmission, a life that contradicts your old myth of needing chaos to prove you're here. You let ease arrive without accusing it of fraud. You let success scale without burning the instrument. You let recognition locate you without renting your face to the past. Signalcraft is the art of being undeniable to reality because you have become legible to yourself. You are no longer shouting into the void. You are harmonizing with the loom. The field doesn't merely respond, it entrains. And the world, hearing a frequency it had forgotten it could trust, begins to tune to you. At this altitude, selection stops looking like choice and starts feeling like liturgy. You no longer pick from a menu of futures. You officiate at the threshold where one coherent timeline receives your vow and others quietly lose jurisdiction. The field respects vows. It routes infrastructure to what you marry, and it withholds power from what you flirt with. You begin to treat every yes as a sacrament with consequences measured in years. You open the day like a temple door. Breath sets the key, gaze sets the horizon, language sets the vow. 3 sentences, spare and sovereign. What you are delivering, what you are refusing, who you are being while you do it. The nervous system receives the coordinates, entropy falls out of scope, emails arrive, and you do not confuse their volume with importance. You answer the few that preserve coherence and archive the drama without a eulogy. The world tugs, but you are stitched to vector. Silence does enforcement. Opportunities multiply, which is how the universe tests sincerity. Counterfeit timelines are no longer grotesque, they are plausible. Same language, different math. A partnership that praises your clarity but bills against your soul. A stage that doubles your reach while halving your aim. A contract that looks like upgrade because the zeros increased, though the truth decreased. You run them through the gates you built. Protect coherence, advance mission, carryable by the body you actually have. The yes answer is still a no. Your refusal becomes an amplifier. The right rooms hear it like a signal flare. You create a praxis for endings, so the future does not inherit your leftovers. No ghost clauses. No, let's stay in touch. Treaties with extraction. You bless what was true, name what is finished, specify what will not continue, and return your attention from their weather to your weather. This is not meanness. This is atmospheric science. Microclimates determine harvests. You do not seed next year's sky with today's unprocessed ash. You notice a new species of courage arriving. Quiet, bone, deep, almost unspectacular. The kind that lets you ship under unremarkable conditions, tell the precise truth when applause is available for the prettier version, and end a profitable branch because its geometry won't scale without bending your spine. Spectacle once masqueraded as bravery. Now discipline wears the crown. The field trusts this type. It is cheap to support and expensive to stop. Selection matures into choreography. You place high-impact work where your circadian engine is hottest. You book conversations that require heart when your system is most relational. You position decisions after movement, so the animal lends its honesty to the boardroom. You sequence intimacy and solitude like intervals, so neither becomes an alibi. Days begin to rhyme. Rhythm becomes culture. Culture becomes compounding. Outsiders think you discovered a hack. Insiders can feel the metronome. You take vows with your craft, not romance maintenance. The vow to show up when the muse is absent and the metrics are quiet. The vow to ship at the threshold of fear, not after fear finishes a speech. The vow to learn publicly at a pace your ego finds slightly impolite. You stop letting marketing speak first. You let reality speak, and you translate. Audience becomes the community that gathers where translation is faithful. They stay because you do not sell them their wound. You show them their voltage. The symbol set refines. The broken loop moves from icon to instinct. Recursion dissolves on contact. The vortex eye lives behind your sternum. Storms rotate around it without stealing center. The golden code migrates from notebooks into contracts and calendars live geometry. The 11 gate stops being a wish and becomes a window. Specific, brief, leveraged. You move when it opens because you prepared while it was closed. Luck is simply your scheduling discipline expressed as grace. Repair stays fast. Drift is noticed at the level of breath before it metastasizes into narrative. You apologize early, not to preserve image but to preserve bandwidth. You end early, not to punish but to protect agriculture. No planting in fields that won't be watered. You praise specifically so the system knows what to repeat. You critique precisely so the system knows what to retire. You keep receipts, not to prosecute, to learn. There is a tenderness to all this that does not dilute its edge. You are kinder because you are clearer. You waste fewer people with your fantasy and fewer hours with your panic. You have stopped asking the world to audition for the role of parent. You have stopped auditioning for the role of savior. You are a steward among stewards, carrying the piece of the loom that is yours to carry. Others appear recognizable by their ease under voltage. Entanglement becomes collaboration, and collaboration becomes infrastructure for futures that would buckle under any single nervous system. Stand in the doorway now. Feel how selection hums, subtle, exact, alive. You have pruned until the fruit can grow without apology. You have tuned until the note carries across distances you used to fill with noise. You have sworn an oath the field can fund. The loom tightens, the pattern clarifies, and somewhere just ahead, at the lip of inevitability, a closing waits that will not end anything. It will reveal what you have been weaving the entire time. You arrive at the edge where endings are only revelations wearing last night's clothes. Breath steadies, gaze widens, language simplifies to the few words that move worlds. You are no longer arguing with the river. You are becoming its channel. The field answers without delay because there is no delay left inside you. It mirrors coherence at the speed you allow it to recognize itself. You stand in the doorway of selection and you do not flinch. The past tries one final negotiation, nostalgia disguised as tenderness, charisma disguised as calling, urgency disguised as service. You let each costume name itself and dissolve. There is nothing here to convince. There is only voltage to steward. You were not sent to tame chaos. You were sent to carry a frequency that makes chaos uneconomical. Listen to the room. It is quiet in a way that used to frighten you. Now it renders detail. You can hear the hinge where a conversation should close, the seam where a project should end, the hidden click when integrity locks and leaves no gap for leakage. Where you once sought miracles, you now practice math. Where you once sought signs, you now build systems that make confirmation inevitable. The field recalibrates in real time. Emails route to new futures. Doors you once begged begin to open because you stopped knocking and became an address. You bless the versions of you who kept the fire during the long night of performance. You release the vows made under sirens you mistook for stars. You archive every costume that earned you belonging at the price of breath. Gratitude without reunion, honor without return. The loom does not waste thread. It insists on pattern. You are the pattern now stitched, tempered, readable. Feel the body receive what the mind declared months ago. Jaw unhooks. Spine lengthens until it becomes a standard you carry into rooms, a silent invitation for other spines to remember themselves. Heartbeat becomes metronome. You walk at the pace of reality, which is to say you move without panic and you stop without guilt. Selection officiates itself. The vow is lived, not announced. What happens next is not drama. It is distribution. Resources find you because resource waste cannot survive your geometry. Collaborators appear who metabolize clarity at speed. Work organizes into rivers that irrigate rather than flood. Love arrives unarmed because it has no war to win. You do not counterfeit humility to stay small, and you do not counterfeit power to appear large. You are exact, and exactness is devotion. Now you close the loop you promised to break, not with spectacle, but with a sentence your life can carry. You observe without fear. The quantum field responds with ruthless, immediate realignment. Let what cannot breathe at this altitude fall. Let what is yours recognize you by the ease with which it fits. Step forward without rehearsal. The loom has your thread, the pattern knows your name, and the future you have been practicing is already waiting on the other side of this breath.